On August 3, 1991, a crimson sunset blazed over Lensk. There was a sense of the approaching night chill in the air. A tall man in an old nylon jacket pulled a black knit cap almost down over his eyes, put on mittens, and took a shovel out of the trunk. He glanced around nervously and furtively to see if anyone was nearby, then drove the shovel into the sparse turf that covered the dry, rocky soil. The steel blade scraped against a stone. The man tired quickly, straightening up now and then to wipe the sweat from his brow with his cap. And he kept glancing around. But even if someone had seen him, no one would have been surprised by what he was doing. But what if a man is digging a small hole, about a meter long, a dead dog? He probably needs to bury a dead dog, or maybe some other small animal from the yard.
The hole turned out to be shallow, about half a meter deep, no more.
The man dragged a rolled-up tarpaulin out from under the JZ-66 truck.
He threw it into the hole, stomped it down with his feet,
and then quickly covered it with the dug-up soil, mixed with stones and other debris. He dug up clumps of withered turf and carelessly tossed them on the ground. He cleaned his shovel on a branch of the nearest bush, got into the car, and drove away. 30 years will pass before the same man appears at this place again. Only this time he will be accompanied by a police officer handcuffed to his arm and an investigative team. At a depth of 50 centimeters, small skeletons will be discovered, and very soon the parents of 4-year-old Marina and 5-year-old Katya will learn that their beloved children have finally been found. There will be no end to their grief. Perhaps it will only stop when the cold northern earth covers the parents themselves. What kind of man was he? At first glance he seemed like an ordinary working man, just like all the law-abiding northerners.
Andrei Barausov was born on August 5, 1961 in Yakutia. He spent his childhood and youth in the city of Lensk.
A calm guy who didn't stand out, he studied just like everyone else. He occasionally got into minor mischief, but he didn't fight or steal. Older guys used to sneer at people like him, calling them kishkatanka. After school he trained to be a driver, and eventually went to the army. He didn't stand out there either, except that people picked on him less than others. Not out of fear, but because they considered him a nobody. They didn't sense any personality in him. After being discharged from the army, he started a family and became a father. He worked as a truck driver at the mining and processing plant. He spent his salary wisely. He wasn't into alcohol, and he received commendations. He didn't argue with the management. Everything was fine at home too. His wife never went to the local police officer, and the neighbors never complained, but his own kids were a little afraid of him. From the very beginning of the investigation, Barausov received a very good reference from his workplace. It was especially noted that he showed no signs of aggression. So what was the problem? Why did such dark aggression toward women suddenly emerge from such a nobody, leaving a trail of brutal crimes? For the first time, Barausov stained his hands with human blood on February 19, 1983. His uncle was celebrating his wedding day. As people usually say, what's a wedding without a fight? A sea overflowing with alcohol, the desire to stand out, to show off with bravado, to be remembered by the guests, or even to outshine the main heroes of the celebration, the bride and groom.
There were also personal grudges, but that's not about Barausov. Yes, he got drunk like everyone else, but he quietly left the apartment with a knife.
But there's nothing surprising about that either. Every third northerner always carries an edged weapon with them. The future maniac was wandering through the streets of Lensk. Maybe he was getting himself worked up thinking about someone else's wedding night. And then, such luck. A young woman in fashionable boots was hurrying toward him, her heels clicking on the cleared asphalt. Nearby was the Solnishko daycare center. The street was lit by streetlights. She had nothing to be afraid of. Foolish girl, apparently. She was hurrying home and didn't realize that tonight she'd be better off walking with a companion like Andrei Barausov. And he blocked the woman's way, bombarding her with questions that easily slipped from his drunken tongue. What an idiot. She tried to break free, didn't even want to say her name. Rude woman. And what tune would she be singing then? If a burly man crushed her in his arms and threw her to the ground. That bitch even tried to scream. Crimson rage, mixed with lust, and the immediate desire to dominate, to relieve his sexual tension, stripped Barausov of the last remnants of his reason and caution. And he lunged at the girl, furiously driving the knife into her weakening body. He didn't hear the sounds coming from her wide-open mouth, nor did he see the world around him. The fire in his lower belly drove hot, bubbling blood to his brain, which was simply screaming, "Kill and take." The woman was still breathing when Barausov dragged her to the kindergarten veranda and started tearing her coat so violently that the buttons flew off a meter away,
Pulling up her warm blouse.
pressing his face into the woman's cold left breast. Barausov didn't hear a heartbeat. Was it dead or what? To his surprise, his passion became even more unbearable. However, he heard the voices of a drunken group near the fence. No animal wants to be caught. And Barausov ran away, carrying with him the heavy burden of unfulfilled desire. The deceased was named Yelena Starilova. Barausov slept for a whole day. The memory of what happened faded in his mind. At first, he still followed the news, and then he realized that the death of the poor girl, who was guilty only of crossing his path at night, simply faded into the bustle of everyday life. Only occasionally did he wake up from the burning pain of what never came to be. He hadn't managed to take her and kill her. He endured this pain for a whole 7 years, and then he couldn't take it anymore. On the evening of August 3, 1991, Barausov was driving his GAZ 66 around the streets of Lensk with nothing to do. He didn't feel like going home. There was a bottle of vodka in the cab, but he didn't even feel like drinking. Drinking alone was not his style. And then, luck struck. By the deserted road, he noticed some little girls. The older one was holding a shopping bag. Children from the north are usually independent. The settlements are small. These aren't big cities where even an adult could get lost. Parents usually say, where could they possibly go? Everyone knows each other. They've been warned 100 times or more about the roads, forests, and rivers with steep banks. And there have been plenty of cases. Boys went into the forest, wandered for 2 days, and came back home on the 3rd. In Barausov's chest, his heart thudded dully against his ribcage. Little girls, you're not like those northern women who can knock out an eye with their fist. And he stopped next to the girls, opened the doors wide and laughed, looking at the older one. Ah, so this is where you are.
Your mom and dad sent me after you. They said, take the girls to the big market. They just put out some children's fur coats there.
They've already borrowed the money you need to try them on and pick out something new. Independent children from the north knew very well about shortages, and that if something was put out somewhere, you had to run as fast as you could and get in line. It doesn't matter whether there's an urgent need for food or other items, or whether they fit or not. You have to buy them first, and then figure it out. Maybe resell or trade them later. Come on, hop in, girls, the driver said kindly. The girlfriends climbed into the car, and Barausov drove his GIZ toward the deserted northwest part of the city, not far from the Mukhtuika River.
The girls were already crying hard, begging to be let go.
He roughly pulled them out of the cab, hitting their little fingers clinging to the window frame 3 times with his huge fist.
He threw Katya to the ground first and roared, take off your pants, or else. The girl screamed desperately and started to crawl away, and the brute, the fiend, kicked her in the side.
Do as I say, or I'll kill you. Barausov slashed the sleeve of her blouse with a knife, The girl turned pale and fell silent.
Barausov turned the limp body this way and that.
When he got off her, Katya's mouth was full of dirt, and little Marinka was still sitting there, pressed against the wheel with her back. Why didn't she run away? She was paralyzed with fear, but still said, when the brute leaned over her, "I want to go home." Soon Barausov replied to her. 30 years later, during Barausov's interrogation, the investigators' eyes were as red as the Lensk sunset in August 1991.
Why did you take the lives of the children? After all, because of their young age and the shock, they could hardly tell anything.
The criminal replied. They kept crying, asking to go home. And I still had an unfinished bottle. I was afraid they would tell their mom and dad.
What would people think of me afterwards? I just took their lives quickly. And a moment later, the monster reassured the investigators, saying they probably didn't even understand.
The thirst to kill and take over for a while crawled back behind Barausov's outward emptiness, but that time inevitably grew shorter. The criminal changed his attitude toward drinking, doing it alone. A bottle of vodka became his only secret friend. There was no other way.
What if he let something slip while drunk in company?
This time retribution almost caught up with him.
Barausov was invited to the police station and they visited his home.
Vitaly Pshenikov, who was a senior operative on the investigative team at that time,
recalled, "We were already closing in on Barausov, suspected him, questioned him, but we had nothing except suspicions."
His wife started complaining to the prosecutor, saying that we were pressuring her husband. Then the prosecutor told us, "Leave the good man alone." In April 1992, Barausov was working as a driver at the Ortonakarsky section of the Agricultural Supply Department at the Dakhninsky Mining and Processing Plant.
According to his assignment, he needed to unload in the city of Mirny. After the hassle with unloading, he headed back to Lensk. That year was essentially the end of the golden age of hitchhiking. Hundreds of thousands of young people used to be able to successfully travel from Vladivostok to the coveted city of Sochi. Drivers liked cheerful people who could entertain them and brighten up the hardships of the road. And only the early 90s put an end to the free journeys of young people to their chosen destinations. Not because drivers changed their attitude toward hitchhikers. The beginning of the country's collapse, the emergence of numerous road gangs, and, as a result, a huge number of crimes that were impossible to solve, changed a lot. But there were also some daring, brave souls.
Such as, for example, Lyudmila Nalivkina.
The girl and the drivers got along easily. At first, their communication had no sexual undertones at all. Barausov, apparently with the best intentions, offered to give Lyudmila a ride right to her house.
That's great. Pleased with each other, the driver and his companion continued their cheerful conversation. And finally, the truck stopped almost near the house on Nalivkina Street. Barausov changed. He began insisting on coming in.
Reluctantly, Lyudmila agreed.
It would have been too rude to refuse. She didn't even notice that the driver picked up a crowbar. He could have counted on a brief sexual encounter, but he wanted something else. That same old desire, clouding his mind, once again turned him into a beast who needed not only young flesh, but also the life of his victim.
Barausov seized the moment and struck the girl on the head several times with a crowbar, using all his strength.
He thought he heard the crunch of bone, and then he smashed his companion's face as well. She could have died on the spot from such blows, but that's exactly what he was aiming for. He dragged the body into the bushes and groaned with long-suppressed lust. After finishing, he quietly left. It all happened under the windows of houses, but who cared about the commotion in the bushes?
Lyudmila's body was found only in the morning. The investigation showed that despite the severe injuries, she was still alive for some time.
She could have been saved if there had been a compassionate person nearby.
As they say, appetite grows with eating. Barausov craved a change of victims. He was once again drawn to the young, untouched innocence of children.
He liked luring victims by pretending to know their parents. In a small town, this was practically a sure thing. Besides, he started to believe in his own luck, felt a rush of excitement and a craving for risk. That's why he kidnapped the next little girl right in the city, at the intersection of Emosova and Oktyabrskaya streets. He told her again, "I'm for Yulechka,"
who was 5 years old.
that he knows her dad, who was asking her to come to his workplace to give her the allotted ration. Chocolate candies, and they haven't been on sale for a long time. The criminal asked the girl to get a tool from the bag, and when she bent over the heavy duffel, he hit her with a crowbar. He pushed the body down with his foot, as if nothing had happened, and drove all over the city. Not far from the Almas pioneer camp, the girl regained consciousness, but she was no longer able to perceive or understand reality. The maniac sexually assaulted her, and then wondered whether to take her life.
And only the feeling that he hadn't fully satisfied himself made him beat the victim to death.
August 28, 1994 became the last day of the little girl's life.
Her remains lay unburied for 27 years before her grieving relatives finally laid them to rest.
There are maniacs who are tormented by demons that drive them to commit crimes. Barausov, on the other hand, was proud of himself and his repeated strokes of luck. He gradually became more and more brazen. Deep down, he suppressed the desire to become famous. But for some reason, he was drawn to committing evil deeds in public places. 4 months after taking Yulechka's life, he went for a walk in the park one evening. And there it was, another stroke of luck.
In the frosty, snowy haze, he saw 3 girls' figures. Barausov looked around. Yes, there were people nearby.
Someone is pulling a child from kindergarten on a sled. Someone else is hurrying home with heavy bags. It's understandable. New Year's is just around the corner. The criminal pretended to be slightly drunk, showered them with compliments, and started trying to chat them up. Now it's impossible to know what sinister plan was forming in the beast's mind. Was he planning to lure all 3 to a secluded place, or separate one lamb from the flock? But the girls turned out to be more grown up and savvy. As soon as he put his arm around one girl's waist, the girl screamed, "Run!" Her friends scattered in all directions. Only Rima wasn't so lucky.
She tripped and fell. Barausov pinned her down with his whole body, pressed a gas pistol to her temple, and hissed, "Be quiet, or I'll shoot you."
And the other girls had vanished without a trace. And there were no more passers-by. Besides, Rima wouldn't have screamed, afraid of being shot in the head. He took the girl to the abandoned construction site, where he sexually assaulted her. A reckless thought struck him. What if he left the girl alive? Would they catch him or not? And he was clearly sure that they wouldn't catch him.
So, on December 22, 1994, the first victim of the Lensk maniac survived.
As he left, he threatened the girl, who was crazed with pain. "If you tell anyone, they'll definitely kill you." How proud he was that no one found out about what happened in the park. That's right, he wasn't Barausov. But death itself, which occasionally goes out hunting, and no one dares to go against death. How many times the serial killer, who had fallen into a delusion of grandeur, committed crimes is still unknown to this day. It's not for nothing that the official source says the true extent of the criminal acts is unknown. That means the land of Lensk still holds, remains waiting for the day of retribution. But every rope comes to an end eventually. Barausov came to the attention of the police more than once, but always got away scot-free. He was detained on suspicion of exhibitionism, but nothing could be proven. However, for the murder of 2 people in August 1977,
he received his first sentence.
People had a hard life back then. There was no work, and wages weren't being paid.
Kids had to take on the hard role of breadwinners, regardless of their age. So 2 friends, 9 and 12 years old, bravely went into the forest beyond the Mukhtuika River to pick mushrooms. It wasn't their first time, by the way. But that day they didn't come back. The parents raised the alarm and didn't wait for the police to get moving. However, the search was in vain because the children encountered Barausov. His wife died of cancer. Living with his daughter and son didn't suit him. Too much trouble and no freedom.
He grew fond of solitary walks in the forest with a Tauz 16 shotgun.
He avoided adult mushroom pickers. He waited for the kids. He believed in luck. And finally he came face to face with luck. 2 little girls walked out onto a tiny clearing. The younger one smiled trustingly at the unfamiliar man. The older one, more cautious, shielded her with her own body, but still said hello.
That's when the beast shot at her. As the girl fell, her body knocked over the little one.
And the man, spreading his arms wide, with the hunting knife already glinting in one hand, was advancing on her. The little one opened her mouth, but she was too scared to scream.
Barausov stabbed her in the chest, twisting the knife forcefully several times in the wound. Then he sat next to the dead, savoring his power over the world.
Soon he felt a familiar heat in his lower abdomen and violated the bodies. He stood up satisfied, adjusting his clothes and smirking.
Still, intercourse with the dead brings him much more vivid and intense sensations than with the living.
Just recently he had a young woman. He attacked her in the park. She just lay down herself, as if saying, "I don't mind at all." And Barausov had her without any pleasure. It was like chewing on paper instead of fresh, warm bread.
But he agreed to her suggestion to continue their love games at her apartment, amazed at her foolishness and his own lack of discernment.
He didn't bother to bury the girls. He just covered them with moss and branches. What if he got the chance to use the mutilated bodies again? Anyway, it was better than worn-out women who were willing to do anything. He didn't know yet that it was this very woman he despised who would find the courage to overcome all her prejudices and go to the police to report the assault. She would describe all his features, name the car brand, and they would just send her away. What do you want? The intimacy was consensual, and the assault had nothing to do with it. It sounds a lot like sexual roleplay. Nevertheless, the woman's visit to the police brought Barausov's hour of reckoning closer. When the criminal was coming out of the forest, he saw a Zhiguli car that had fallen into a ditch, and why not help someone in trouble? But despite the good deed, luck turned away from the maniac. The girls' bodies were found by the invited dog handlers. At the end of August, Barausov was invited to the district police department for a conversation. From that moment, the tangle of crimes began to unravel.
The police found the Grebnyakov family, whom Barausov had helped pull out a stuck car in the forest. The people gave precise and consistent testimony.
A photo composite was created based on their descriptions. The visit to the police by the woman who had been assaulted also came to light. The key detail was the Giza 66. Working with the criminal was doubly unpleasant. He showed no remorse and his confessions caused real pain even to hardened lawmen.
The head of the Lensk District Criminal Investigation Department, Vitaly Pshenikov, recalled. He strangled with a rope, beat with a stick, shot and cut.
I asked him back then, "Why are you such a freak? If you're taking a life, you could at least do it in a normal way."
He said without any regret, almost as if complaining, "They don't die." He was a bit down at that moment. He said, "Fine, I'll write everything. You can't even imagine how much I've done, all the things I've caused."
Talking to him makes me feel less than human. No regret about anything. Of course, I wanted to give him back to his parents. If I were a little crazy myself,
I would have shot him right away. He lied, confused us, and mentioned burial sites that didn't exist. In the end, no remains of other victims of Barausov were found, so he was only charged with double homicide. In 1998, Andrei Barausov was found guilty on all charges.
After which, the court sentenced him to death, which, due to the moratorium, was replaced with a criminal sentence of 18 years in prison.
Barausov was transferred to Correctional Colony Number 9, where especially dangerous criminals were held.
One could hope that there, his life, as a lover of the little ones and the dead, would be short and full of unforgettable experiences.
Not at all.
Either the rules in prison had changed, or Barausov once again managed to make himself seem like a nobody. He started to show good behavior, hard work, a lack of affection, and a non-confrontational attitude. He was even transferred to an honorable job in the cafeteria. After getting through his sentence unscathed, the maniac moved to the village of Gliadin in the Altai region,
Where his daughter lived.
and then he left for Novosibirsk. And his atrocities did not stop. 6 girls fell victim, but no one will ever know the details of the cases. The trials were closed, and all the documents became inaccessible.
The crimes in Novosibirsk might not have happened if the Altai Ministry of Internal Affairs had listened to an exceptionally honest and courageous man.
Vitaly Yegorov, who was part of the investigative team that took part in catching Barausov after the double homicide in 1997. While the criminal was in prison, Yegorov became a writer and created a novel based on the case of the Lensk maniac. When Barausov was released and went to Gliadin, the writer and retired Ministry of Internal Affairs officer of Yakutia, Vitaly Yegorov, began sending letters to the Altai Ministry of Internal Affairs. He warned that a particularly dangerous criminal had appeared in the region. He demanded that he be placed under strict administrative supervision. He reminded them that such monsters never change.
They adapt, blend in, hide, and then go back to their old ways.
Here's what Vitaly Yegorov himself said. I wrote several times, but there was no answer for a long time. After another letter, I finally got a response.
I was deeply outraged. The response from the press office said that we do not disclose personal data.
If only the Altai police had at least told me that Barausov had gone to Novosibirsk.
I would have tried to warn the Novosibirsk police to prevent the crime. To finally expose the maniac Barausov, Yegorov wrote 2 letters.
He sent one to the Russian Human Rights Commissioner Anna Kuznetsova and the other to Bystrykin.
From the letter to Bystrykin in Lensk, in August 1997, Barausov was detained for taking the lives of 2 girls aged 9 and 12. In 1998, the court sentenced him to the death penalty.
But a moratorium on the death penalty was introduced, and after serving 18 years he was released. He then moved to live permanently in the Altai Krai, and later to the Novosibirsk region,
where he committed 6 episodes of lewd acts and assaults against those under 18. In 2021, he was sentenced by the Novosibirsk court to 18 years in prison. He is serving his sentence in a high-security prison for especially dangerous criminals in the Altai Krai, Penal Colony, number 9.
Back in the early 1990s, he was suspected of taking the lives of children, whose bodies were never found. In 1997, when he was detained for taking the lives of 2 girls, he confessed to taking the lives of 5 more people, 2 women and 3 girls, but later retracted his confessions.
There is reason to believe that they didn't fully investigate him back then.
Now there is a great opportunity to talk to Barausov about this topic. He is 60 years old and 18 years in prison for him is equivalent to a life sentence.
and he might cooperate by giving them the locations of his victims' burial sites. I'm not saying all this without reason. I've worked in criminal investigation my whole life and have solved hundreds of murder cases, including cold cases from previous years. And back in Soviet times, I was recognized as the best detective in the country. I worked my way up from a rank-and-file detective to the head of the criminal police of the Ministry of Internal Affairs in Yakutia.
Knowing the behavior of people who have received a life sentence, I'm almost certain that Barausov will cooperate and reveal the burial sites of his victims. Alexander Ivanovich, please assign an experienced investigator to check Barausov's involvement in the mentioned murders.
Bastrikin's reaction was lightning fast.
The investigation into the old criminal case was reopened, and it was assigned to one of the best investigators of the Investigative Committee of Yakutia, Alexei Kalechev. On January 5, 2023, the maniac Barausov, hoping for at least some leniency, signed a pre-trial cooperation agreement with investigators.
Only after the prosecutor signed the agreement did he open up, telling how he took the lives of girls and women in Lensk.
In 1983, he took the life of a girl he didn't know near a kindergarten and left her body on the grounds of that institution.
He also stated that in 1992, he took the life of a young woman he didn't know in the city of Mirny and left her body under a house. In August 1991, he took the lives of 2 girls and hid their bodies under a garage.
In 1994, he took the life of a girl he didn't know in a yellow jacket and hid her body in a forest area.
In May 2021, he gave additional testimony, from which it follows that during his interrogation in September 1997, he intentionally indicated the wrong location, where he buried the bodies.
He was simply afraid of the death penalty or life imprisonment, which he was facing. During the investigation, Barausov was given audio recordings from 1997 to listen to, in which he recognized his own voice. In addition, he had a face-to-face confrontation with the officers from the Lensk District Police Department who were chasing him in those years.
He fully admitted his guilt in taking the lives of 3 girls, as well as Elena Storilova and Lyudmila Nalivkina. Based on Barausov's testimony, a forensic voice and speech analysis was conducted. The documents state,
Scientific research in legal psychology and the psychological profile of Barausov AI, compiled from the criminal case materials with high probability, allow us to assume
that the accused did not intend to leave the victim alive, since she knew too much about him.
When answering certain questions, he behaves inappropriately, becomes tense, freezes, bites his lips, stutters, and often uses filler words like or well.
There is a high probability that he is hiding some information during these investigative actions and partially fulfilling his desires as a person who loves children. For him, the sexual details of his crimes are a kind of taboo, so during his testimony he tries to avoid them and not talk about them.
Even when the investigator insists on clarifying these details, he limits himself to general phrases or one-word answers like yes or no.
Taking credit for it, he repeatedly tries to insist that the victim died very quickly, that she was barely breathing.
During the investigation, he speaks freely and without emotion about taking a life and avoid details in every possible way.
In general, the most disturbing thing in such cases is disguising cruelty as something ordinary.
This type of psyche is structured around the ability to keep opposing states in separate compartments of consciousness, with almost no spillover between them.
This is called functional compartmentalization. One compartment is responsible for social behavior, predictable, convenient for others, and reinforced by external approval.
The other is activated only under a narrow set of conditions: solitude,
absence of witnesses, and an available victim.
There is almost no emotional communication between the compartments, so a person is able to have a completely routine conversation an hour after the episode without the slightest dissonance. For his psyche, these are literally different modes of operation, switching between which does not require conscious effort. In criminal typology, such a profile is classified as an organized type, characterized by planning and control of the situation, the ability to recognize the right moment and to delay the impulse until the appropriate conditions arise. This fundamentally distinguishes him from an impulsive criminal who acts in a state of emotional agitation. The organized type is methodical, patient, capable of waiting for years, and it is precisely this endurance that most often confuses the investigation. Episodes stretched out over time appear to be different and unrelated to each other. There is also a systemic reason why such people remain above suspicion for years. Investigators and neighbors are equally susceptible to the representativeness heuristic. The brain looks for danger where something outwardly seems dangerous. Aggression, instability, a tendency toward conflict. A calm and predictable person is automatically excluded from the circle of suspects, simply because he does not fit the prototype. This is a cognitive trap that experienced investigators and observant neighbors alike fall into.
That's why we hear things like, "Oh, he was such a good person. No one would have ever said he was like that."
Trust in children's reactions is a separate matter. Adult perception works differently. It filters anxiety through social norms. It's awkward to suspect a decent person without reason.
But a child's psyche doesn't do that kind of filtering.
A child's fear of a specific adult is an unprocessed threat signal, often more accurate than an adult's assessment, but he's always so polite. By the way, I've already talked about people whom everyone around considers quiet and harmless for years, and then it turns out that this was actually their cover on my Telegram channel. Go check it out, the links are in the description, and I'll leave additional materials and sources related to the case there as well. The trial of Barausov, who was accused of committing 5 murders and 1 sexual assault, began on March 28, 2023 at the Lensk District Court. The criminal case was prosecuted under 2 articles. Clause E of Article 102 of the Criminal Code of the RSFSR, intentional deprivation of life with the purpose of concealing another crime, combined with the abuse of 5 persons, and Part 3 of Article 117 of the Criminal Code of the RSFSR, sexual assault of a person under the age of 18.
Based on the terms of the plea agreement, Andrei Barausov, despite the severity of his actions, avoided a life sentence.
As a result, on May 23, 2023, he was sentenced to 21 years in prison. After the verdict was announced, Andrei Barausov unexpectedly retracted his confession and claimed he had no involvement in the crimes. In an interview with reporters from the Almazny Krai television and radio company, Barausov stated that he was under pressure from the investigators when giving his testimony and falsely incriminated himself. He claimed that he did not know where the bodies of the girls and young women were actually buried.
Would you like to say something to the families of the victims? Maybe apologize or something?
What do you mean by victims?
To the relatives of the victims.
Well, what can I say if I didn't do it?
In support of his claim of innocence, he cited the fact that at the burial sites of the victims, which he pointed out to the investigators, during the exhumation carried out as part of the investigation, the investigators were unable to find any human remains. Can we expect the truth from people like Barausov? Well, most likely no. Their actions stem from hidden psychopathological traits, a defective value system, and various personality disorders. No maniac wants to be caught, exposed, or punished. He usually considers himself above others. Does justice protect citizens? Sometimes it can, though with a delay. But the answer can also be no. Many videos on my channel testify to this. And for those who watched up to this point, Next week, a minor household issue that has been bothering you for months will resolve itself, without any scandals or stress.
And here's another bonus case. You probably haven't heard about it.
An early cloudy morning on November 20th around 4 a.m. At this time, many city residents were already heading to work, traveling along the A121 Sortavala highway located in the Leningrad region. At such an early hour, the traffic is not yet heavy, but there are already cars on the road. Suddenly, one of the drivers lost control and a Mitsubishi Galant car crashed into the guardrail. Accidents on various highways are tragic events, but they are commonplace. They happen every day, and only a few cases gain widespread attention and make the front pages of newspapers.
But why did this particular one stand out?
Dozens of drivers witnessed a strange incident. As soon as the car crashed into the barrier, 3 people jumped out and ran toward the forest. The men tried to escape, not caring about their vehicle at all. They immediately ran off. The impact of the car hitting the guardrail was so strong that the trunk popped open. At the moment of the collision, a load fell out of it. Something you could hardly call a typical item that every driver would have in their car. A human body fell onto the road. It's a corpse lying there, right? A corpse, right? They opened it. It was lying completely still. There was no doubt it was a person. The person was dead, and most likely he didn't die from injuries sustained in the accident. The drivers who witnessed the incident quickly realized something was wrong and called the police. The police quickly arrived at the scene. Cars with wailing sirens appeared on the road, and a traffic jam gradually began to form. The arriving law enforcement officers quickly realized that it was not just an accident, but a homicide. A 50-year-old man with a horrific wound on his neck was lying on the highway. It stretched from ear to ear, and the head was almost severed, held on only by the vertebrae. They quickly began searching the car's interior, and as they started collecting evidence, they found only small blood stains on the seats, which clearly belonged to the drivers and passengers themselves. The culprits had practically handed the police their DNA, which meant it wouldn't be difficult to find them. In the trunk, the police found a shovel, and this discovery helped them reconstruct what had happened. The criminals wanted to bury the body in the forest, but due to their own stupidity, they couldn't get there. Now the case can be easily solved. The culprits won't get far, as they made too many ridiculous mistakes. The police managed to identify the victim. It turned out to be 50-year-old Arkady Kazinian, an unremarkable man who owned a tire repair business, but there is no public trace of his activities. Kazinian moved to St. Petersburg from Yerevan in 1992. He lived with his wife in the Nevsky district for a year, after which they divorced. The last known address was on Prosveshchenia Avenue in the same city, where he presumably lived with his new wife and underage son. His biography is quite simple and unremarkable, so who could have wanted to take his life? During the investigation, the police will find out that the motive was completely primitive, just simple revenge over a foolish conflict. Law enforcement determined who the car belonged to. This person was not directly involved in the killing itself. He only helped the criminals get to the place where they could hide the body. But the man was drunk, and because of that, he got into an accident, which would prove fateful. The passengers were Yegor Komarov and Jan Shipanovsky. They were good friends and had known each other for many years. They were the main suspects in this case. And gradually, the police would learn more and more horrifying facts about them. At first glance, Komarov's life story might seem completely unremarkable. He lived with his parents, didn't work anywhere, and at the time of the incident he was already 23 years old. He was born and lived in St. Petersburg. He used to live with his parents and grandmother in a communal apartment on Osipenko Street, and at the time of the crime he was registered with his father in a one-room apartment on Shosse Street in Murino. Judging by his Vkontakte page, Komarov was interested in both anarcho-primitivism and elixirs of immortality. As for music, it was pure psychedelia, and his subscriptions ranged from public anthropology to odd jobs in St. Petersburg. Among his friends was the second detainee, Jan Chepankovsky. He was notable only for his facial tattoos, and he came from Luhansk and lived with the third person, the one who was driving the car on the Sortavala highway. Nothing else was known about him, but the man turned out to have more skeletons in his closet than anyone could have guessed. The suspect was detained in an attic on Bolshaya Zelenina Street. He had been living there recently, and even managed to hide there after the accident.
As it turned out, the three criminals ran out of the forest onto a dirt road and called a taxi from there.
And then, as if nothing had happened, the three calmly went home, not even trying to hide more carefully. That's why they were found very quickly.
The police immediately conducted an interrogation, during which they learned what caused such an act.
Shortly before the incident on the road, there was a fire in one of the garage cooperatives on Laboratory Street. No one was injured, so nobody really paid much attention to this case.
But this case was directly connected to the corpse in the trunk.
It all started in that same garage. Yanich Szczepankowski brought his car there for repairs. The late Kazinian worked at that very place.
That evening he was working there with a crew of workers he knew, and according to some reports, they were under the influence of alcohol.
A conflict broke out between the client and the workers. The exact reason is unknown, but the argument was clearly more than just a heated conversation.
Some sources claim that the mechanic tried to steal the car and refused to hand over the keys. It all ended with Kazinian beating Szczepankowski, and Szczepankowski decided to take revenge. The young man started calling his friends for help, who would go with him to sort things out. Two friends responded to his request, Yegor Komarovsky and another unnamed man. The three of them went to the garage. Komarovsky was armed with a knife. They managed to catch the master inside the building. There, they brutally dealt with him. It was Komarov who inflicted such a wound on Kazinian.
Meanwhile, another accomplice was keeping watch on the surroundings to warn the others in case of danger. After that, they set the garage on fire to get rid of the evidence.
Yegor and Jan called their friend from the car, asking him to drive them to the forest, and apparently he agreed. That's how they ended up on the Sortavala highway. It seemed that the case was solved, and the police had learned everything they needed to know. The guilt of the criminals was undeniable.
But one of the police officers had a chilling conversation with Yegor Komarov. During that conversation, it turned out that this wasn't his first time taking a life. "I actually enjoy taking people's lives," Yegor Komarov suddenly declared.
He looked completely calm, as if they were having an ordinary conversation about the weather.
"The people" is plural, one of the detectives noted warily. He already realized that there were more hidden aspects and even more terrifying details in the case.
"By the way, I killed that guy in Sosnovka for no reason," Komarov said carelessly.
Such words sent chills down your spine, but the police officers had to overcome their fear. After all, Komarov had just confessed to a crime that had remained unsolved until now.
"Why do you say it was a mistake?" An officer moved closer to Komarov. In just one interrogation, they managed to solve 2 murders. The criminal confessed to his guilt himself. It turned out he didn't taste good. This chilling quote would appear more than once in news headlines. At that moment, the police realized that Komarov was not just a simple murderer, but a real cannibal. So what happened in Sosnovka? Late evening, September 27, 2020. A large park, shrouded in the coolness of the night and the approaching autumn.
A 38-year-old man who worked as a stockbroker was leisurely heading home, not even suspecting what awaited him in just a few minutes.
He had no idea that if he had dressed warmer, the tragedy would not have happened. He didn't notice the criminal lying in wait, but by the time he realized his life was in danger, it was already too late to avoid it. As if out of nowhere, Komarov attacked him with a knife, but the victim was not going to give up so easily. A brutal struggle for life began, and the man resisted the criminal with all his might.
But nothing can be stronger than a monster with a knife. According to Komarov himself, after delivering 10 blows, the flimsy knife began to fall apart, and Komarov sank his teeth into the victim's throat.
After the passerby stopped breathing, Yegor cut out his tongue and hid the dead body in a drainage pipe. His only motive was the desire to taste human flesh. For this, he took the victim's tongue with him, boiled it, and ate it. He described this process to the police in detail during the interrogation, completely without remorse.
He really did eat a person.
He didn't eat a person. It's just severe constipation, that's all.
He's so skinny, like me, maybe 6 people, or maybe just a part. So did you really eat a person?
He cold-bloodedly comments that he didn't like the taste of the meat. Komarov decided to try human flesh on a complete whim when he came with his parents to the country house.
There, on September 26, he found an old folding knife and decided to fulfill his dream. With the knife, he went from the country house to his parents' apartment, where he lived with them.
In the apartment, he took a backpack, put a change of clothes in it, and went out in search of a victim. He says he spent about 15 minutes choosing his victim based on only one criterion. He needed the person to be lightly dressed so that the knife could easily penetrate the flesh. Such a minor detail changed the fate of one person. A year later, the case was solved. Until then, the investigation had been suspended
because there were no suspects or evidence. There was no video camera in Sosnovka, not even any lighting. The investigators couldn't find the weapon or any clues.
The case could have remained unsolved.
On November 22, the Vsevolozhsk city court placed 2 suspects in custody. Both suspects, accused of taking a man's life, remained in the detention center until January 20th, 2022. At the time this video was made, there is no information about the further fate of the prisoners. The third person responsible, who drove his companions in the car, is charged under the article for concealment. He has been released under travel restrictions. Komarov will have to undergo a psychiatric evaluation, as some investigators suspect that he might have lied about cannibalism so that he would be considered insane and receive a lighter sentence. Nevertheless, for taking Kazinian's life, he faces a sentence of up to life imprisonment.
And what do you think about this case? Leave your comments, like or dislike the video. Check out other videos on the channel and visit the platforms with exclusive content.
There is something to watch there, both for free and with a subscription. The scariest video on the Strashnota channel, The Death of a Poet, the director's uncensored version of one of the videos.
You can also watch and read about the 19 strangest ways to die.
And you can save it for yourself and keep it as a memory. For example, it's good to use the 10 ways to calm down quickly as a reminder. Or you can take a test to see if you're a true crime fan or already a suspect.
Or you can read a solid, useful article about what a love for true crime says about a person. There, I debunk myths, provide statistics, and share facts.
And I explain when there are actually real warning signs. Go ahead, subscribe. All the links are below the video, and check out other videos on the channel.